Okay, welcome everyone to this session of Philosophy Matters. Tonight's talk is on 21st century Stoicism, developing character, living with purpose. And our guest speaker tonight is Joseph Bullock. So let me say what tonight's talk will be about. Stoicism has played a major role in shaping ethical considerations for over 2 millennia, profoundly influencing religious doctrines and renowned philosophers. Despite its frequent misinterpretations and critiques, Stoicism's fundamental principles can guide us to leading a purposeful life. At the heart of Stoic philosophy lies the conviction that our well-being and growth stem from living in accordance with nature and honing our logical skills regardless of our circumstances. Joe Bullock will help us explore how pursuing virtue can contribute to human fulfillment, and will highlight some of the key theories that form the foundation of Stoic practices. In addition, he'll examine Stoic cosmopolitanism, a belief in the universal community of all people that fosters a spirit of fairness, transcending nationalities, races, and cultures. There'll be an opportunity for questions and discussion at the end of Joe's talk. So a little about Joe. Joe Bullock is a co-founder of the Philadelphia Stoa, a community that is dedicated to helping individuals live happier and more meaningful lives. Joe obtained a degree in economics from Temple University and has consulted for Fortune 500 companies and various government agencies. Joe currently works for the Department of Defense and resides in Haddonfield, New Jersey. Please join me in welcoming Joe. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you for
Over to
having
you.
me. Thank you for having me here this evening. It's a great honor. I want to thank Humanist Victoria for having me here this evening. It was a delightful conversation with Les and Akiva that actually led to this event about Stoicism. So I'm very much excited about being here this evening, and let's get started. 21st century Stoicism, developing character and living with purpose. I'm actually going to be focusing on the developing character part more than anything else, and some of the exercises and practices that we can use in order to build our character. And as far as finding purpose, we will cover certain aspects of developing a philosophy of life. This is my journey to Stoicism. Imagine yourself in the company of many kind friends. Perhaps you meet in a sports club, at work, or in a church. You've been meeting with these good friends for many years. Now imagine one day one of those friends asks you for help. They ask you to join them on an adventure. So together you head off on an exciting journey into the unknown. But along the way, things turn sinister. Your friends take the wrong path. You both quickly find yourselves immersed in danger, dishonor, and destitution. Then your friends abandon you, leaving you to deal with their mess alone. You're confused, hurt, disoriented, scared, and suffering. What do you do? This is my story about my journey to Stoicism. I was raised in a mainstream religion, and in about 2000, early 2000s, I'd actually moved down to Washington, D.C., where I was actively recruited by a very elite and exclusive group within that mainstream religion. For the longest time, it was, a community. I did my best to help my friends. I helped quite a few people while I was there. And after a while, because I didn't conform to all of their requirements, I was no longer in my friend's circle. Some of them went so far as to actually go ahead and tarnish my reputation. And I felt hurt. And I was sitting there and I was trying to figure out, what went wrong. And I was shaking my head, and I just said, the only thing I have left, you can lose your friends, you can lose your material possessions, but they can't take your actions from you. The things that you do define who you are. And that no matter what, even if they ruin your reputation. So then I'd come across this quote from Epictetus. And this is about 5 years ago. Some things in the world are up to us, while others are not. Up to us are our faculties of judgment, motivation, desire, and aversion. In short, everything that is our own doing. Not up to us are our body and property, our reputations, and our official positions. In short, everything that is not our own doing. So this absolutely resonated with me at that particular moment in time. I mean, I don't have control over my friends. And I realize that's who they are. That's not who I am. That's their character, and I have to manage mine. So I basically I went on my own and started my journey into studying Stoicism, and I found it to be one of the most welcoming and joyful communities where there's intellectual rigor and just wonderful people, and it's a very open mindset that the Stoics have, and that's what I was really longing for. So I want to start this conversation as to why we need a philosophy of life in the first place. You know, Bill Irvine is a well-known Stoic who actually had written a book that covers this nicely. And the first reason that I put down was direction and purpose. You know, a philosophy of life provides a framework for understanding our place in the world. It can help us find purpose and guide our actions. Consistency, it promotes integrity so that our actions align with our values. Now, this is a very important point. One of the very well-known cognitive behavioral therapists, Donald Robertson, has a Socratic questioning class where it is focused on finding out what is most valuable to you. And you'd be surprised, a lot of people are really incapable of naming what they really value. I've asked a lot of my friends, and they've gone through the exercise, and they struggled. And so an example of this would be, you start to ask yourself the question, well, I go to work. And then you ask, okay, well, I go to work to earn money. Well, why do you earn money? Well, I earn money to be a good husband or to raise my children or whatever it may be. And so what the underlying value in that particular instance are your children or your spouse. And so with that being the case, you start to have a better idea of how to allocate your time, and your values aren't in conflicts with your actions. And that actually prevents a cognitive dissonance, where some people are often not identifying values things that they value most, and they act differently. So self-understanding and developing a philosophy of life requires deep introspection. And deep introspection means confronting your fears. When we confront our fears, many times that we recognize that our fears are irrational. We start to think of the source of the fears, and even what actually may cause, what would be the worst case scenario if our fears were to come true. And they really actually aren't always as bad as we may have first envisioned. So I think understanding is what we're afraid of is a critical part of self-understanding. And this goes to actually living a better life. Resilience, having a framework for understanding and interpreting the world, a philosophy of life can help us navigate adversity and challenges. And moral and ethical grounding, a philosophy of life, helps to ensure that our actions align with our ethical principles, promoting social cohesion and improving our relationships. So, what is Stoicism? Stoicism, Stoic virtue focuses on the cardinal virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Now, the ultimate goal is to live a eudaimonic life, or eudaimia. It is the definition is eudaimia means flourishing, good spirit, and happiness. Aristotle described it as the highest good humans could strive toward, and a life well lived. Eudaimonia and Stoicism. In Stoicism, eudaimonia is achieved through the pursuit of virtue and maintaining one's character. In the philosophical context, it goes beyond momentary happiness, and instead it's lifelong fulfillment. So this is sometimes you hear the people distinguish between joy and happiness. Happiness is maybe in a moment that, whereas joy is something that's much more sustaining. Okay, this is a Stoic triangle. And it really kind of outlines what 3 factors will really help you live a more eudaimonic life. And what you'll see in the lower left-hand corner is to take responsibility. And take responsibility is one of those most important things, because we don't necessarily dictate the circumstances that we're in, but we do dictate how we respond to them. And for me personally, this is a very important step that I needed to take. I needed to accept what had happened and handled that situation, and accepted responsibility. For the longest time, I didn't necessarily want to believe that people that I had trusted and who I thought were good people would have turned to do so many nefarious things. So taking responsibility, I owned it. It didn't matter. It was my situation. So that was very critical. Focusing on what is up to us. This is another critical point, that it's often referred to as the dichotomy of control. For those of you who may have heard of that, instead of using Epictetus's words. By focusing on what is up to us, we're not necessarily focusing on external circumstances. We're more focused on ourselves and how we act in the world. And that detachment from those external circumstances will help you be more at peace, because you're focusing your energy on something that you can do. And there are situations that you just simply will not be able to, things that you may lose. You may lose a loved one in your life. You don't control that. So if you focus on things that are what are up to you, then that helps you at least, understand the limitations of that you have, and how many things you have control over. It's quite humbling once you actually think about it. So from there, it is arete is excellence. And I think this is obviously one of the most important things. Greek words often translated into excellence and is the cornerstone of Stoic ethics. The Stoics used thought virtue is necessary and sufficient in order for someone to flourish. In other words, things like reputation, health are considered indifference. They contribute to eudaimonia, but if they're used virtuously. So one example would be, obvious example would be if you have happen to be fortunate enough to have enough money. What you do with that money may or may not be virtuous. So it's not virtuous in and of itself. So, but how the Stoics look at virtue is they don't look at them as things like these reputation or money or even your health. Those are preferred indifference. So I'll go to the next slide. Virtue is something that is totally up to us. We can focus on making ethical decisions regardless of potential of external consequences. That's what essentially is this again is the dichotomy of control. That's one of the reasons as to why it's so important to Stoicism. Virtue is self-sufficient. Virtue is self-sufficient and self-fulfilling, providing an intrinsic source of well-being. I'm going to provide an example of that, so we'll come back to that in a moment. Virtue is intrinsic, not instrumental. The Stoics view virtue as valuable in and of itself, not as a means to achieve external ends. And virtue leads to right action. Stoics emphasize the importance of aligning our thoughts, intentions, and our actions. But the other part is that virtue is rational. So the idea that you're acting virtuously, that you're thinking, you're not reacting emotionally, so you're reacting thoughtfully and how your interactions. And we'll talk about how the cardinal virtues serve as a compass for how to, basically where to aim, and some of the other specific practices that Stoics use in order to not only to determine right action, but to use rational thinking in order to make their decisions. So virtue is self-sufficient, and I've changed the names on these people, but these are real circumstances, actually. So kindness in different circumstances. There's a wealthy woman named Jennifer. She generously uses her wealth to donate to charities, raises money for abused women, uses her resources to assist those in need, which was a homeless shelter for women. And her wealth empowers her acts of kindness. Then there's impoverished Jennifer. Jennifer loses all her money. Despite her financial constraints, she extends her help by volunteering at local homeless shelters for women, sharing meals with less fortunate, offering emotional support to abused women. Her kindness stems from her actions, not her material resources. So you see the difference that virtue is accessible in both circumstances. Now, so the self-sufficiency of virtue, Jennifer's kindness is independent of her financial status. It stems from her character, not her possessions. It resides in her actions, decisions, and attitudes. It's totally within her. Jennifer's virtue as self-sufficient. Virtue is self-sufficient, needing no external rewards. It's about the intent and quality of your actions, not their outcomes. Jennifer's virtue is completely within her control. So now that kind of is an example of the dichotomy of control. Again, these are real stories. Actually, it was the reverse. She went from having very little to having more. Oops. The unity of virtues. Now, this I think is probably, I find to be the most important part of what we'll be covering here today. It's often overlooked and people don't think about it. But in terms of the virtues are interdependent of each other. All the virtues are interconnected. They work together to guide our actions and our decisions. The unity of virtues, all virtues are different aspects of the single underlying virtue. And a holistic approach, virtues should be developed together rather than focusing on one at a time. So an example of this, and I'm going to continue to try and provide practical examples through each one of my slides. So this makes it real. I want to keep this on a very practical level. If somebody were to work for me and I were to withhold payment to that individual, and I were to take that money and invest it, and in that time, I became fabulously wealthy. And this individual had, in the same time period, lost his wife, his home, his car, he's on the street. And I would walk by him and I'd say, "Hey, Jim, how are you doing? It looks like you're struggling." And he could tell me all the things that went wrong. And if I were to offer him money, would that be charity? I mean, the reason why I can't be charitable is because I wasn't just in the first place. And you're starting to see the relationship between virtues, the virtues. So there are a lot of times that people may steal from someone else and give to another. But that's not necessarily living a virtuous life. Now, it's not just relegated. I could give an example of courage and justice and wisdom. Courage is actually a vice in certain circumstances if it's absence of justice and wisdom. If somebody runs into a burning house and they don't have any wisdom and they're just doing it for to make themselves look good, potentially. It's neither just, it's not wise. And so the courage that the person was showing by overcoming their fear was actually a vice. And this is a very important point on a number of levels. We can do a number of thought experiments along those lines. But I think that this is something that's worth thinking about, because when you're questioning yourself, one of the things that we'll talk about is that how we question ourselves at the end of the day, this is our moral compass. And you start to ask yourself, was my action wise? Was it courageous? Was it temperate? Was it just? And you're evaluating yourself. And this is the guides, the compass that you're using. One of the other things that I'd like to note is that Stoicism has become very popular over the past, 10, 12 years, and by a lot of wonderful work by the modern Stoic movement. But a lot of the times it's also become popular because it is the foundation of things like cognitive behavioral therapy and rationally emotive behavioral therapy. And these are empirically proven therapies to improve people's lives. And I think, and this is in my personal opinion, I was having a discussion with somebody the other day that the difference between going to therapy and pursuing virtue are two different things, in the sense that one, yes, you can go to therapy, it's just about yourself. But to actually aim at a higher ideal and to hold yourself to a higher standard, that's transformative. So I think that that's an important part, and that's where it becomes a philosophy of life and not just something that's self-help. So Stoic practice, there's two areas that we can go into here. There's the cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, temperance. And as I said before, these serve as our moral compass. And then there are the three disciplines: discipline of action, discipline of desire, action, and assent. And together, these two work hand in hand in order to develop the Stoic practices. There's also a Stoic theory, which I won't get into today because it made the presentation too long. But there's also a physics, ethics, and logic that actually underpins this. And it's a very rigorous logic. And I was actually going to use one of some of the logic problems from Les's website as a way of demonstrating some Stoic logic. I'll go through maybe an example anyway. Wisdom. Wisdom represents the knowledge of what is truly good. We'll get into that. Justice. Justice is treating others with fairness, even when they have done wrong. Courage is upholding your moral conviction despite external circumstances. That one actually kind of resonates with me, obviously, given my story. Temperance, exercising self-restraint and moderation in all aspects of life. And these four make up the cardinal virtues. By striving to cultivate these four virtues, individuals can lead a life that's both moral and fulfilling and resilient in the face of life's inevitable hardships and uncertainties. So temperance. Temperance, what is that? Well, temperance involves balance, having a balanced life, demonstrating self-control, and it leads to a personal well-being. And sometimes what I like to use is, as examples sometimes, is the absence of temperance in somebody's life. So say there is an individual who is a workaholic. They have, physical issues, physical health issues. They have mental health issues, potentially. It leads to depression and anxiety. It's well documented that some of these things occur. It leads to social isolation from family and friends. And their personal development is actually hindered by their hobbies, and by not being able to develop some of their hobbies, or it reduces their overall life satisfaction. So what I'm trying to point out here is that it's the absence of temperance that is really kind of causing these things. But more importantly, I think that it's important to ask the question, why are you doing that in the first place? And this is what my friend actually had this kind of crisis many years ago. And it was status. So here's an example of not only not having temperance, but he was chasing something that was not virtuous. He was chasing money and status. And those are things that he didn't even control. So he was at risk on a number of different levels. So that isn't a real world example of how somebody can be misguided. And when you deviate from virtue, that it can be very costly. Now, maybe I'll stick with that individual as we work through this. Courage is upholding virtue, overcoming fear, and personal integrity. Now, let's take the same individual that was, that is a workaholic. That person is failing to recognize that they have a problem. They're maybe not confronting themselves. They're not acknowledging that they need help. They may be even ignoring professional help, professional opinions. And they don't seek any kind of therapy because they're afraid of the social stigma that comes along with it. So they're afraid of what people might think of them. So they failed to actually confront the problems that they're facing. Now, let's just take on the flip side that somebody does have the courage to take on their demons, so to speak, and face their psychological issues that they're dealing with. That not only allows them to develop personally, but it also develops a certain amount of empathy for other people. Because once you go through that process, that you start to understand how difficult things can be. And so that your personal relations get better on two levels. One, you have a more balanced life. But number two, you're also more empathetic to the individuals that may be struggling around you. So I think that this is another example where I really like the one we're using where it kind of comes together. Now, justice. Justice is universal kinship, moral integrity, and social harmony. So for this example, I'm going to use is, and I'm assuming that most people know what universal kinship is, moral integrity, and social harmony. But for this particular example, I was just going to use two people that had a misunderstanding. Let's just say it's my friend Steven and I. And Steve, in the heat of the moment, says something very hurtful to me. And Steve, I go out and I seek justice. If I was seeking justice, I would communicate my feelings to Steve, and telling him the words that he used were very hurtful to me. And I'd be being truthful. I'd be showing courage by engaging him. And we would both grow from it. One way or the other, it would be a form of personal growth. Now, that's the justice way of taking it. That's the higher road. Now, lack of justice would be, on the other hand, would be if I went out and started spreading rumors and harmful rumors about my friend Steve, or I destroyed his reputation and hurt his feelings in the process. The thing is that when you're not just, that it leads to this endless cycle of getting somebody back. It's not closure. It's justice is to restore balance and to actually provide us a way of having a personal development, especially in our relationships. Justice is part of actually the discipline of action, and really focuses on our interactions in everyday life with our fellow man. So finally, the final virtue that I'll cover here for this portion is wisdom. Let's go back to and pick on our friend, the workaholic. Why not? He he's a know-it-all personality, and he often, believes he's right. His opinions, are never, he's never wrong. It would be unwise. He would be maybe counseled by medical professionals to get help, but he would think he knew better. And I think we have a lot of different circumstances where that's happened over the past couple of years, where people have thought they'd known better than the medical profession. And they disregard the advice from health professionals and continue to live with chronic fatigue and lower work performance and eventually health issues that weaken their immune system, and they have heart disease. Ignoring well-documented evidence and of the necessity of sleep and failing to make the adjustments necessary for long-term well-being exemplifies the lack of wisdom. So this is somebody that, again, is acting unwisely, and you can see the relationship that how temperance would actually also work with and courage would also work with wisdom in order to solve this individual's problems. Again, these are all real scenarios. These are the three disciplines of Stoicism. Now, what these three disciplines do are they provide us with practical actions or practical ways of applying Stoicism in our daily lives. So to break them down, the discipline of desire deals with the acceptance of our fate. We've talked about that already. You have to accept where you are. It's the first step. And also deal with your desires in order to be able to focus on what's most important to you. The discipline of action, which has to do with with philanthropy or love of mankind. Now, I really want to harp on this for a minute. I don't think, today we'll be able to get to Stoic cosmopolitanism. I'm going to apologize about that because I think of time. However, Stoicism is often seen as a passive philosophy. Oh, I can't, it's outside my control. There's nothing I can do about it. So, but nothing can be further from the truth. The idea is that you have to pursue virtue in order to actually derive the benefits of being a Stoic. That it's not something that you just sit around on a couch and all of a sudden, you're a Stoic and you're fine because you're just doing what's in your control. I equate it to something like, well, you have to go to the gym. So so that's just one analogy I use. But I do hope that that stigma goes away at some point because it just simply isn't true. And Stoic cosmopolitanism speaks to that. I really wish I'd included those slides. Now it's like it could be a follow-on topic. The discipline of assent, which has to do with mindfulness of our judgments. And we'll talk about that. We'll provide an example about how we assent to our impressions. The Stoics had a pretty sophisticated ways of determining what was true. And it involved propositional logic and things along those lines and cataleptic impressions. But we won't get into that today, but maybe at some other point. Okay, so discipline and desires. Seek not for events to happen as you wish, but wish for events to happen as they do. Epictetus. So Stoic philosophical exercise, psychological exercises. I'll give you one example of that will curb your desire. So a lot of times we will spend time wishing things were different than they actually are. And the Stoics have a practice called negative visualization. That negative visualization is envisioning that the loss of a loved one, or the loss of something else. It may even be your job or things along those lines. And the reason why that is a healthy exercise is that if you wish for your job to be different, or you even may wish for your spouse to be different, you gain a new appreciation for who they are if you're actually envisioning what it would be like without them being there. And you're no longer wishing for things to be different than what you're actually going through. And that's just one known technique that the Stoics use. It's called negative visualization. And I found that to be helpful. And sometimes when I find myself wishing things had been a little bit different. And I go through and evaluate what I do have, and it creates a level of gratitude for the people that I've met, and it really does help with my relationships as well. So the next one is amor fati. This is actually a fairly new concept. This is loving your fate. It's actually from Nietzsche, but as far as loving your fate, sometimes that gets debated because there's this saying that the Stoic can be happy on the rack because essentially as long as your character isn't being harmed, you're not being harmed. I don't know about loving that, but I think it helps you deal with it at the very least. And the virtues associated with the discipline of desire are courage and temperance. So you have the courage to confront your desires, and you have the temperance as well that you have to demonstrate. So we can go back to our workaholic. He would need both of those in order to overcome his challenges. Now, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. This is one of very famous Marcus Aurelius's quotes. Fostering a flourishing love for mankind, embracing the results of one's action, and establishing a connection between justice and philanthropy. And so this is actually, this should not be courage. This actually ought to be justice. So right here. Anyway, apologies for that little error. But this virtue, the virtue of justice, is because it's how we interact with everyone else. If you think about it, somebody that would be bullying others, lying and deceiving, being disrespectful to the laws and regulations, inconsiderate of others, or cruel towards animals, they would be contributing to disharmony. So that these are actions that are actually are obviously not associated with wisdom or justice or a discipline of action. Now, there are pro-social behaviors as well, which could mean sharing your resources, donating to charity and volunteering your time, standing up for someone who is being unfairly treated, acting environmentally responsible and recycling your resources, showing empathy by listening and responding to others' feelings and experiences, and encouraging and complimenting others to boost their confidence and morale. Those are pro-social actions that actually allow us to interact with one another in a more meaningful way. Okay, choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been. So that's Marcus Aurelius. So this is the Stoic discipline of assent. This involves living in accordance with reason and truthfulness, monitoring and evaluating judgments, and it is that's primarily affiliated with the cardinal virtue of wisdom. So, what would be a good example of this? I mean, it's about scrutinizing our judgments ultimately. But I was thinking about a college student would be a good example, that she receives a lower grade than she normally would, and on a major assignment. And her immediate reaction is, my life's over. You know, I'm a failure. I'm a bad student. I'm not intelligent. And this is about one test. Now, you're assenting to an impression based on one event and not necessarily looking at the whole. So I know somebody that had a really good friend of mine who says, you know, he catches me every now and then. And he says, you're judging the part by the whole, as the whole. And so what happens is we overreact. It's irrational. So assenting to the impression that all these things are wrong about us by one test would be completely irrational. So by using Stoic mindfulness techniques, one would actually take a step back and evaluate the situation and determine whether they really are, a bad student. Is there enough evidence to support it? And that's where you have evidence that is supporting your observations. The facts start to support what your beliefs. But at least it's fact-based. It's not based just on emotion, if you're one emotional reaction. So how do we build these things? So there's something called ascesis, the path to inner transformation. The meaning of ascesis is derived from the ancient Greek meaning exercise or training, practical discipline for self-transformation. The purpose of ascesis is to cultivate wisdom and virtue, developing resilience and inner strength, maintaining tranquility in the face of challenges. The role of ascesis in the Stoic way of life is integration of philosophy into daily existence, transforms attitudes, values, and behaviors. So these are basically the exercises that we perform in order to live a virtuous life. And the one thing, I like about Stoicism so much, that it's drawn to me, is that it's really practical. I mean, there are regular exercises that you can use that allow you to live your best life. So here are two books that I highly recommend if you're interested in Stoicism. A very good friend of mine, Massimo Pigliucci, and Greg Lopez wrote a very good book. It's like a CBT book, and it has a series of Stoic exercises where they use ancient Stoic philosophers in the first part, coming up with the theory, and then they have an actual practice on the back end. So another one written by Tim LeBron and Pierce. And Casey Pierce is and both Tim LeBron. They have a whole manual on basically how to evaluate yourself in a quantitative way, to see where you are on a more, I guess, would be on a CPT spectrum. You could maybe even say how stoic you are, but nonetheless, it's a very good handbook to really kind of see where you are with your emotions when you get angry, things like that. and what are the things that you're most concerned with? What do you worry about? And all these things are very practical value clarification exercises. So just really quickly, I'll just speak to the Stoic practices for mindfulness. One is self-examination. I think that's pretty straightforward. That self-examination can include a number of things, where I could go to Les and I'd say, Les, give me some feedback on something. And I trust his judgment. And so that would be one way of actually getting good feedback and understanding how to improve myself. Journaling would be another one. Keep the daily records and to note your personal progress and areas of improvement. And I think that over a period of time, that if you're asking yourself the right questions, that will yield a lot of benefits. You'll be able to see patterns in your behavior. Premeditation on adversities, that you essentially are thinking about adversities before they actually occur. You're anticipating one. If you think you're going to have an interaction that is adversarial, you premeditate on it so that when the moment occurs, that you react in a more virtuous way. A view from above. This one has been very beneficial for me. Sometimes when we start to feel like, okay, the whole world's coming down on me, if you take a third, like kind of zoom out and take a third person's perspective and kind of see what's really kind of going on, or think about what's going on in the world, you realize that the world's not necessarily after you. It's just, and your situation's not as bad, may not be as bad as it seems. And even more importantly, other people have gone through this. So that's something that is reassuring, that you know that people have persevered through certain circumstances. Indifference of practice, concentrate on the aspects on your within your personal control, be indifferent to those outside of it. I think we talked a little bit about that. And we also talked about negative visualization as well. So conclusion. Okay. So I want to apologize first for not covering Stoic cosmopolitanism, because I think that is one of the most important topics that I don't know where I am on time. I think I'm right around 40 minutes. I don't know, something in that range. But Stoic cosmopolitanism actually deserved its own, almost its own session. Because I really feel like Stoic cosmopolitanism is a real area where a lot of utilitarian philosophy and the Stoics overlap. And I really want to explore that with this group, because I really find there's so many things in common with us that we often find differences in how we would answer questions. And there are differences. There are a lot of commonalities too. Value and ethics. Stoicism provides a strong moral framework for focusing on virtue. Practicality. I think I went through that pretty clearly. Stoicism is a practical philosophy. It provides actionable advice on how to deal with real life situations and emotional challenges. Stoicism is more about how to live than about theoretical concepts. Emotional management. Stoicism offers a technique for managing negative emotions and cultivating positive ones. That's actually a very important point that I want to talk about too. A lot of times Stoics are accused of possibly suppressing their emotions, and it's really not that. It's kind of reframing and kind of replacing the emotion with something that's much more productive. So you start to ask yourself, what is the adversity that you're actually going through? And then you evaluate how your behavior, how your reaction is impacting the consequences of that of that adversity. And then you realize if you're overreacting, you can replace it with a behavior that is actually much more healthy. You're still recognizing the fact that it is an adversity, but you're kind of transferring that energy from worry, concern, or anger to something that's much more positive, so that you can get, be more productive and handle the situation much more justly. Strong negative emotions often stem from incorrect beliefs. That's the other aspect of it, is that what we believe to be true, what that student believed to be true, was incorrect. So that was one example, and we can achieve a more balanced and emotional state by working on changing these beliefs. Mindfulness in the present moment. Stoicism encourages us to focus on the present moment and not worry too much about the past or the future. This aligns well with many principles of mindfulness and can contribute to a greater sense of well-being. And living in accordance with nature. This is actually a very important point. Living in accordance with nature means that we're pro-social. It means that we don't live on an island. It's not we're not self-sufficient, meaning we're interconnected with everybody else. When you think about the person that put together this microphone and this camera and this computer, we're all interconnected. So that's what it means to be pro-social, is that we're interconnected in how we function. So it's part of Stoicism is to be pro-social. And that you're using reason. You're using reason in your decision making. So that would be the other reason, the other main part of living in accordance to nature. And it's applying reason to our decision making. Our decision making improves both ourselves and society. So I'll offer a Stoic thought experiment. But I'm open to all questions. I know that we have a large group of utilitarians here, usually, and for whom I love. And so maybe I thought about how potentially, truthfully, a friend of mine had brought up a question about how utilitarians and Stoics could, where they could find some common ground and help each other. And that's an interesting area to me. So here are some questions I'll throw out there, and if you wish to answer them, feel free. If not, ask me anything else, and I'll provide you with the best answer possible. So there are lots of ways. There are a lot of other ways, but here's three to consider. Stoicism might assist utilitarianism to remedy its main critiques. For example, utilitarianism discounts individual rights and justice by often prioritizing overall happiness at the expense of individual rights or justice. So my question is, can Stoic principles assist rule utilitarianism? Now, I will say this right now, Les will have an answer to all these questions. I had a discussion with Les about utilitarianism one evening, and let's just say I didn't necessarily win the conversation. Not that that's the goal, but I was sufficiently answered. So utilitarian could theoretically require extreme sacrifices for individuals if it would lead to greater overall happiness. So question 2, can Stoic threshold limits assist rule utilitarianism? And utilitarianism relies on measuring and comparing conscious experiences, which are subjective phenomena that are difficult to compare across individuals. Question 3, can the Stoic virtues assist preference utilitarianism? So I am not an expert in utilitarianism, so I would actually love to hear anybody's answers on that. Yeah, I really wanted to do. I very much wanted to do Stoic cosmopolitanism. I think it's such an important topic, and I bet you I could have fit it in, and now I regret not doing it.
I don't
So
regret it. Don't regret it because we'll have to get you back to talk about
I
Stoic cosmopolitanism.
that would be
Uh,
an honor.
Look, thank you very much, Joe. That was absolutely terrific. I think you really brought home, looking on as an outsider, what I find attractive about Stoicism. It's incredibly practical. Instead of academics sitting in chairs in their offices in a university, this is real practical stuff that makes a difference, helps people lead more meaningful and better lives. And I really like that. I mean, it really is Stoicism really is the intersection between philosophy and psychology.
Yeah.
And not many, I mean, when you study moral philosophy, you just don't get that practical insights that I think Stoicism brings. Uh, to access other videos and podcasts in this series, go to the Philosophy Resources section of the Rational Realm website at www.rationalrealm.com.